Hello, sailors and patriots. Today we are going to look at the leadership of Kenneth Braithwaite, the 77th confirmed Secretary of the Navy. Appointed by President Trump, Braithwaite served as the sixth and final Secretary of the Navy of Trump's first term. He served from May 29, 2020 to January 20th, 2021. We are continuing our analysis of the best and worst Secretaries of the Navy in the modern age. While his tenure was brief, it was shaped by some of the most difficult and unprecedented challenges in Navy history. Let's take a look at his leadership performance and where things went wrong, or where circumstances simply didn't allow him to succeed. Before diving into his performance and metrics of performance, it's important to understand the unique situation that brought Braithwaite into office. He stepped in to replace his predecessor, Richard Spencer, who was dismissed after a highly publicized dispute with President Trump over how to handle the case of Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher, who had been wrongfully accused of war crimes. The fallout from Spencer's handling of this case led to his removal, and Braithwaite was called upon to stabilize the Navy in a time of great uncertainty and tension. With his background as a former admiral and U.S. ambassador to Norway, Braithwaite was seen as a steadying force. But the crisis he faced was more than just leadership challenges. It was a moment where the Navy needed someone with a broader skill set than what Braithwaite had been prepared for. But let's get into the specifics of his performance. As you may know by now, we take a look at Secretaries of the Navy by their statutory requirements to train, equip, and recruit the fleet while managing the budget efficiently, staying aligned with the President and the Secretary of the Navy. So let's begin with recruitment. Braithwaite's tenure coincided with the global disruption of the COVID-19 pandemic, which caused significant obstacles for military recruitment. The pandemic halted in-person events, delayed basic training, and made it challenging to recruit sailors and meet recruitment goals. While Braithwaite introduced creative measures like virtual recording and virtual recruiting, these were not enough to counterbalance the pandemic's widespread impact. Recruiting is one of the most critical aspects of a SECNAV's responsibilities, as outlined in USC Title 10. It's essential for maintaining a strong and capable force. While the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted recruitment efforts, Braithwaite was still accountable for ensuring that the Navy adapted its recruitment strategy to these new challenges. Virtual recruitment efforts, digital outreach, and the adaptation of recruitment tactics to reflect the health crises were within his purview. He could have pushed for quicker adaptation to these virtual platforms, sought innovative ways to reach young recruits despite the challenges, and ensured that the Navy maintained its attractiveness and accessibility for potential candidates. The failure to meet recruitment targets, especially in light of these adaptations, would be directly attributable to his leadership in this area. Unfortunately, despite Braithwaite's best efforts, his tenure was not fast enough or long enough to make these disruptions. Therefore, he scores a 4 out of a possible 10 on recruitment. Next, let's talk about training. Training is at the heart of ensuring the Navy is ready for any mission, which puts it at the heart of the Secretary of the Navy's job to ensure that the Navy is ready for any mission. Braithwaite was focused on restoring fleet readiness and re-establishing traditional naval standards. He spoke frequently about the need for a stronger Navy culture and emphasized professionalism across the ranks. But in reality, his time in office was far too short, and the ongoing pandemic made it difficult to implement the significant changes he was urging to the training pipeline. Braithwaite's vision for the Navy's future didn't materialize in the form of concrete, lasting improvements to training programs. His tenure was marked by urgency, but without sufficient time or political backing. The goals the Secretary of the Navy set out for training remained largely unmet. Therefore, when it comes to training, Braithwaite receives a 5 out of a possible 10. Moving on to equipping the Navy. The Navy under Secretary Braithwaite was in a race to close the technological gap with adversaries like China, particularly in areas like shipbuilding, modernization, and autonomous systems. Braithwaite was committed to these goals, but his leadership was caught in the challenge of maintaining an aging fleet, a backlog of maintenance, and a strained shipbuilding workforce. The pandemic added additional pressure, delaying vital repairs and prolonging maintenance schedules. Despite his efforts to modernize, the Navy's material condition remained a significant challenge. The pace of new ship construction was slow compared to China's growing naval power, and the Navy was unable to make up lost ground during Braithwaite's time in office. He certainly pushed for modernization, but his brief tenure wasn't enough to fully address the systemic issues plaguing the fleet. While the pandemic exacerbated these challenges, Braithwaite's failure to address the Navy's material readiness and push for greater efficiency in shipbuilding and repairs remained within his purview. It was his core job and responsibility. His initiatives in technological upgrades and shipbuilding were commendable, but slow ship construction rates and an insufficient workforce in shipyards were areas where he did not manage to implement necessary changes during his tenure. Therefore, when it comes to equipping the Navy, Braithwaite scores a 4 out of 10. Next, we turn to budget efficiency, where Braithwaite struggles significantly. Managing the Navy's budget is one of the most critical responsibilities of the Secretary of the Navy. Unfortunately, Braithwaite's time in office saw some significant fiscal missteps, particularly in the area of personal travel. This may be just the outer layer of the type of leadership and management that Braithwaite exerted over the Department of the Navy. In just 8 months, he racked up a personal bill of $2.4 million in travel expenses, including extravagant trips like a $232,000 visit to Wake Island, where no military personnel were stationed, and $24,000 spent on attending the Army-Navy football game. At a time when senior Pentagon officials were cutting back on travel due to the pandemic, Braithwaite's spending was seen as excessive. This failure to prioritize the Navy's financial needs and to be an example of what a good steward of the government's money is, especially at a time of tight budgets and growing demand for modernization, stands as one of his most significant leadership failures. Therefore, when it comes to fiscal responsibility, budget, and efficiency, Braithwaite earns a 4 out of 10. Now, let's look at how Braithwaite aligned with the policies of the president. Despite challenges he faced, Braithwaite largely aligned his policy with President Trump's broader defense strategies, particularly the emphasis on great power competition. Throughout his tenure, Braithwaite remained focused on China and Russia, prioritizing the Navy's role in countering these rising powers, especially in the Indo-Pacific and the Arctic. However, his appointment came during a particularly sensitive time in Navy leadership. Braithwaite had to step in for Secretary Richard Spencer after the controversy surrounding the case of Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher, a situation that caused significant political tension within the Department of Defense. Braithwaite's leadership was in part a response to this crisis, and while he was seen as a steady hand to manage these tensions, his ability to implement long-term strategic goals was limited by his brief time in office. His alignment with President's policies on great power competition was clear, but his ability to execute transformative change in the Navy was constrained. Therefore, he scores a very good and respectable 8 out of a possible 10. In conclusion, Kenneth Braithwaite's overall score comes to a 25 out of a possible 50, placing him at 26 out of 28 modern SECNAVs. His tenure, though earnest and dedicated, was shaped by circumstances that he did not allow, or that did not give him the time or the political backing to address. While his alignment with President Trump's strategic vision was strong, the Navy required a leader who could navigate complexities of recruitment, training, and equipping, areas where Braithwaite's leadership as Secretary of the Navy ultimately fell short. He was caught in a moment of crisis, and while his efforts were commendable, they weren't enough to lift the Navy in the way it needed. Kenneth Braithwaite's time as SECNAV serves as a reminder that leadership is not always about individual performance. Sometimes it's about being in the right place at the right time. Unfortunately for him, he was faced with a crisis that required a leader with a different skill set, and his brief time in office left much of the Navy's fundamental needs unmet. Nevertheless, his service should be understood with sympathy, as his appointment came under trying circumstances that made it difficult for him to succeed. Thank you for watching. Sailors, stay strong, stay focused, and remember that leadership, even in the toughest times, is about doing what you can with what you have. Stay Navy